Hi, my name is Jennifer. Welcome to my channel. Today I thought I would talk about all the books I have DNF'd from April to July. Going forward, I am going to just talk about DNFs in my monthly wrap-ups. I think that makes more sense. But for now, I wanted to catch up on all the books that I have DNF'd from April to July. I've just looked at my DNF stats for the year so far, and my DNF rate is currently 32%. So let me tell you about the books I have DNF'd and, if I can remember, why I gave up on them. Okay, so first up is Flamingo by Rachel Elliott. So Flamingo was on the Women's Prize long list this year. I got it out the library. I only read a few pages. It's sort of a domestic family drama, and it just wasn't interesting to me at all. I don't think I've heard any good reviews of Flamingo. Next was a short story collection, I'm Waiting for You, by Kimbo Young, translated from Korean. So I'm Waiting for You is it's like interlinked short stories, sci-fi, speculative, and I think I read like the first story and just struggled to get into the rest of it really. It's probably, I'm sure it's a very good book, but I just couldn't get into it. Next up is The Midwife by Tricia Crestwell. So this is a historical novel. I think there's some sort of mystery or intrigue in there. I read a few chapters, it just wasn't grabbing me at all. Next is Build Your House Around My Body by Violet Kupersmith. So this is another book that was on the Women's Prize long list this year. I actually read about 3/4 of this book, and it's a reasonable length. But I don't know. I think it's a book that requires quite a lot of concentration, and I just sort of lost my way with it a bit. The Understudy, which is by 4 authors, so Holly Brown, B.A. Paris, Sophie Hannah, who's one of my favourite crime authors, and Claire Mackintosh. I DNF'd this one relatively quickly. So those 4 authors are each telling the story from a different perspective, and that makes up the novel. So it's like a murder mystery type thing set around a dance school. But I felt like the narratives, the narrators that I read from in the start of the book, they just merged into one, and they seemed just really similar to each other, and I couldn't differentiate between the characters. Okay, next up, Insomnia by Sarah Pinborough. So I quite like Sarah Pinborough. I've read, I think, 3 of her books before. Insomnia I read a few chapters of. I think it was only published this year, and it just didn't grab me at all. Next is, okay, so this is called The Perfect Crime, and it's a short story anthology by a number of different authors. I read a few of the stories and just wasn't interested enough to carry on. Next up is Cloud Cuckoo Land by Anthony Doerr. So Cloud Cuckoo Land is a book which I had picked up in the library a couple of times previously, and sort of been like, do I want to read this? And decided I probably didn't. Then Alice from Alice and the Giant Bookshelf read Cloud Cuckoo Land and absolutely loved it. So I thought, okay, I need to give it a go. So I did try it out, and to be fair, my heart probably wasn't in it. I read a few chapters. Again, that's a book that requires, I think, quite a lot of concentration and commitment. It's told over a few different, I think, time periods. There's different narrative strands which are all linked together by this book. And I just didn't have the concentration required for it, sadly. Next up is a thriller called Can You Hear Me by Elena Varvello. This was translated from Italian, and I didn't read very much of it, but it was weird because I just struggled to understand what was going on, and it wasn't in a way, like with some books at the start, you're not meant to understand what's going on. It wasn't like that. I just literally, it just made no sense to me, so I don't know if it was a translation issue or what. Next is Nemesis by Agatha Christie. So this is a bit of a surprise. Nemesis is a Miss Marple novel which I have read before many years ago. And it's sort of a sequel, but not quite sequel, to A Caribbean Mystery, which is another Miss Marple book. So in Nemesis, we have some of the same characters who were in A Caribbean Mystery. So does it spoil a Caribbean? I'm not sure it entirely spoils a Caribbean Mystery, but I guess it does in the fact that you know that these characters, because they're now in Nemesis, clearly did not die and presumably were not the murderer themselves. Nemesis is an unusual Christie novel in the fact that we don't really know what crime is being investigated. So Miss Marple is left something in a will from this man who's died, and she met this man in the novel A Caribbean Mystery. And what he's left her is this puzzle. He wants her to solve a crime, but he doesn't tell her what the crime is. He also leaves her these coach tickets. So she goes on this coach trip and meets these other people, and she's trying to figure out what crime it is she's meant to be solving. So I found it just slightly dull, really. And when I DNF'd it, I did Google the ending to remind myself, because I have read it before, but I couldn't remember what happened. And yeah, I don't think it's one of Agatha Christie's best. I think it's a little bit problematic, if I remember rightly. So that was Nemesis. Next is In the Pond by Ha Jin. This is a book I actually still have. I was looking at this before, and I might possibly give this another go. So this is a Chinese novel, and our main character, Xiao Bin, he works in a factory. He's got a wife, a small child, and it's about him sort of standing up against the organisation who he works for, who controls the housing that they live in and all of that. It's a very short book. It's less than 200 pages, and I read about 3/4 of this book, but didn't finish it. And I think, if I remember rightly, I made the mistake of starting another book at the same time, which never works out well for me for some reason. I just cannot read multiple books at once. I don't know how people do it. Like, I can read a short story collection and have that going on in the background, that's fine, but I can't read more than one novel at once. I think that was the mistake I made here. When I went back to it, I was just out of the story. And I remember when I first started reading this, it was sort of quite interesting, so I may possibly keep hold of that and give that another go at some point. Okay, Acts of Desperation by Megan Nolan. I thought this was a book that I might like. I didn't read very much. I don't know if it was because I wasn't in the mood for it, but I think it was sort of the narrative voice put me off. I think quite often when I only read a few pages of a book and DNF early on, it is because the narrative voice just grates on me and I just can't get on with it. So yeah, I didn't read very much of Acts of Desperation at all. Next is Outside by Ragnar Jonasson. This is translated from Icelandic. I really like Ragnar Jonasson. He's written some great books and some great crime series. This one, I think I read a fair amount of it, but it was just really nothing special at all. So much so that I wasn't even interested to carry on reading. Next is a book that I read or tried to read for my library book club, and that is The Stone Diaries by Carol Shields. So The Stone Diaries won the Pulitzer Prize many years ago, and I did not get very far into that book at all. So The Stone Diaries is a fictionalised autobiography, if you like, of this, or biography of this American woman. So it follows her whole life story, which is not my favourite thing anyway. But I got so bored that I DNF'd before this woman had even been born. That was how dull this book was. No one in my group liked that book. Next is One Moonlit Night. So this is a Welsh novel by Caradog Prichard, translated to English by Philip Mitchell. I picked this one up randomly on the library shelf, and it turns out it was one of the 70 books that was chosen for the Platinum Jubilee. It's quite a short novel, told from the perspective of a 10-year-old boy living in this small like Welsh town. It's set in the early 20th century. And I'm sure it's meant to be very good, and I'm sure it is very good, but it was just a little bit depressing, so I DNF'd. Next is another book which I read or didn't for my library book group, and that is The English Patient by Michael Ondaatje. Obviously, you know, Booker Prize winning and very sort of well acclaimed book. And I was looking forward to reading it, but I really struggled to follow what was going on. And I don't think it was even just like the number of characters, which usually can be an issue for me because my head can't keep track of lots of characters. But I just literally couldn't understand what was happening. So I DNF'd it. And again, no one in the group really liked that book either. We don't tend to get on with like prize winning books very much. Next, Pure Colour by Sheila Heti. I think this is another one where maybe I didn't quite like the narrative voice. I didn't read that much of it. I thought it might have been the kind of thing I would like, but I just couldn't get into it. Next is a book that I have mentioned on my channel before, Emma by Jane Austen. I actually read half of this book, which is a lot more than I was expecting to read. It's a book that I had DNF'd in the past, like 25 years ago. And my favourite film is Clueless, which is obviously based on Emma, which is why I thought I would give Emma another go. And it got off to a good start, but in the end I just got bored. I mean, it's just people riding around in carriages, going to dinner at each other's houses. And it's too boring. Next, another book I have mentioned as well, The Luminaries by Elena. This is a very, very long book. Did I read maybe a couple of 100 pages? And I had heard it's a book that takes a bit of getting into and stuff, but I just wasn't bothered enough to carry on, really. We're nearly done. When Things Get Dark, this is a short story anthology by a variety of authors, and the stories are all inspired by Shirley Jackson. I like Shirley Jackson. I've read, I think, 4 of her books. I need to read more. So the authors in this collection, we've got Josh Marlerman, Paul Tremblay, Joyce Carol Oates, Carmen Maria Machado. I read a few of the stories and none of them were particularly interesting to me, so I just didn't carry on. And then, okay, the final one that I'm going to mention is Upgrade by Blake Crouch. So Blake Crouch, I've read 2 of his novels before. I've read Recursion and Dark Matter, and really like both of them. Upgrade is his most recently published novel. It was out this year. I think I read about half of this book. So it's about gene editing. So our main character has, sort of unbeknownst to him, had his genes edited in some way, which gives him these sort of almost superpowers, I guess. And the book is really about him trying to figure out how this has happened, why it's happened. It links into his family history and legacy and so on. But I just thought it was really poorly written. Like, every other sentence was like, oh, I was able to run so fast because my gene, and it gave like a load of letters and numbers, had been edited. And oh, I was able to do this because of this gene. It's just boring. It was maybe an interesting idea, but I don't think it was particularly well executed, and I wasn't interested enough to find out the ending. So there we go. Those are my DNFs for April to July. As I say, going forward, I will talk about my DNFs and my monthly wrap-ups, I think. So for August, yeah, there are a few DNFs in there, let me tell you. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're well, and I'll speak to you again very soon. Bye.